They say a mother's love never wavers. Mine did. Quietly behind porcelain smiles and silver cutlery. At family dinners, my plate was always special. Smaller, blander, set apart. I told myself it was care, protection, tradition. But the truth came wrapped in foil, a chocolate truffle, 10 years expired, handed to me with the words, "Yours is different." Hours later, I collapsed on a bathroom floor, shaking with pain. That was the night I stopped pretending, because when your own mother teaches you that you are disposable, you learn the only way to survive is to gather proof and press play. I used to believe my childhood was ordinary, even blessed. I was the daughter everyone pointed to when they wanted proof that Helen Grant had done something right. Such a good girl, relatives would whisper at holiday gatherings. Such a studious one, polite, obedient. And my mother Helen would lower her eyes modestly, shaking her head as if she didn't want the praise, though I could see the flicker of satisfaction cross her face. She liked being seen as the selfless parent, the woman who carried her daughter on her back through storms and never once complained. I grew up internalizing that image, convinced that if people admired my mother, then I must have been lucky. Our house in Spokane was small but neat. 2 bedrooms and a narrow kitchen that always smelled faintly of bleach. On Sundays, we went to church, and I would sit beside her, hands folded tightly in my lap, while she nodded graciously at neighbours. Helen sacrificed so much after her husband passed, they'd say, and I would nod too, absorbing their words as truth, sacrifice, duty, love. These were supposed to be the cornerstones of our relationship. But cornerstones can hide cracks. From as early as I can remember, there was something peculiar about the way meals were arranged in our house. My mother was meticulous, almost ceremonial, about food. Plates were set with precision, forks aligned at exact angles. When extended family came over, she cooked lavish spreads, roast chicken, buttery rolls, steaming casseroles that perfumed the entire house. Everyone else would receive a plate heaped with variety, meats glistening, sides piled high. Mine, though, was always different. Smaller portions, plainer food, a plate with less seasoning, fewer choices. At 6, I believed her explanation. "This is just healthier for you, sweetheart. I don't want you to get sick." At 10, I swallowed the excuse. "You've always been delicate. You need something lighter." At 16, when my cousins mocked me for eating plain steamed vegetables while they tore into fried chicken, I blushed but said nothing. My mother's word was law, and her smile, tight, controlled, but never openly cruel, warned me not to protest. What strikes me now, looking back, is how often the word special was used. "Your plate is special, Mara. This piece is set aside just for you." Relatives cooed about my discipline, how thoughtful my mother was to watch over my diet. They didn't see the way I envied their full plates. They didn't hear the hollow in my stomach after dessert was cleared. And I never dared contradict her, because to do so would mean I wasn't a good daughter anymore. That label, good daughter, was both crown and chain. It meant high grades, polite answers, a willingness to obey. It meant ignoring the gnawing resentment when Helen praised Noah, my younger brother, for his hearty appetite, for being a growing boy. Noah was allowed seconds, thirds, extra dessert if he wanted. "Mara doesn't need as much," she'd say firmly, setting my plate aside as if it were settled law. I told myself it was her way of loving me, After all, didn't mothers want the best for their children? Didn't sacrifice sometimes look strict? She worked long hours at the local clinic, carried grocery bags up the porch steps alone, made sure our clothes were ironed crisp. Who was I to question the woman who gave me life and kept a roof over my head? By the time I left for college, I had perfected the art of self-denial. Smaller portions didn't just feel normal, they felt deserved. When I visited home for holidays, the ritual continued. My plate was always the last to be served, always a little less, a little duller. And when my cousins teased me, I smiled and shrugged, insisting I didn't mind. Deep down, though, I felt something hollow that had nothing to do with hunger. When I married Ethan, he noticed but didn't interfere. He thought it was just Helen's way, a quirky family tradition not worth challenging. And I went along, grateful at least that he didn't laugh. To him, my mother was a saintly figure, aging gracefully, pearls around her neck, steady hands that never faltered. He respected her, even admired her. And maybe I did too, in a way. Admiration can live alongside quiet ache. Because even as I smiled across the table, even as I accepted my portion without complaint, there was a voice in me whispering the question I didn't dare ask. If my plate was always special, what did that really make me in her eyes? Some of my earliest memories aren't of school or play, but of family gatherings. The kind where every relative squeezed into our modest house and the dining room table groaned under the weight of dishes. My grandmother, a stern woman with powdery perfume and quick eyes, would stand at the head of the table directing traffic like a general. Plates were passed, laughter spilled over, and for a moment I felt as though I belonged in that warm, noisy circle. But then came the shift, always subtle, always disguised as care. I remember being 8 years old, hair tied back with a red ribbon, sitting at the table with my cousins when my grandmother's voice cut through the chatter. "Mara, sweetheart, why don't you take your plate and eat in the kitchen? We don't want you to get too full before dessert." The words sounded benign, but the glance she shared with my mother was anything but accidental. Helen was already lifting my plate, her smile tight and efficient. "Come on, honey, it'll be quieter in the kitchen, easier for you." I obeyed, of course. What else was a good daughter supposed to do? I carried my smaller portion into the kitchen and sat at the counter, listening to muffled laughter from the other room. The wall between us might as well have been miles thick. I could hear Noah giggling as he reached for another roll, hear the scrape of forks on heavy china. My plate looked pale by comparison. Steamed vegetables, a thin slice of chicken, a glass of water. I told myself it was fine. My mother knew best. That scene repeated itself year after year. Sometimes the excuse was my sensitive stomach. Other times it was my delicate frame. Grandmother would murmur something about keeping me slim, and my mother would nod in solemn agreement. Relatives never argued. They accepted it as part of my upbringing, a quirk of family routine. It became normalized cruelty wrapped in the language of care, and I absorbed it because children don't know how to separate love from control. By adolescence, the ritual had etched itself deep. Thanksgiving dinners meant being ushered to a corner chair, away from the main bustle, with a plate that looked like a poor imitation of everyone else's feast. Christmas Eve, when cousins lined up for pie, I was offered a single cookie and told, "That's plenty for you." I smiled through it all, cheeks burning, pretending it didn't matter, because to protest would mean accusing my own mother, contradicting the grandmother everyone revered. The twist was that no one ever called it punishment. They called it protection. And so I grew up believing that to be set apart was a form of love, even as it hollowed something inside me. When I finally left home for college, the contrast stunned me. In the dining hall, food was plentiful and anonymous. No one inspected my plate, no one told me what I could or couldn't eat. For the first time, I could choose, and yet I often found myself instinctively taking smaller portions, picking plain options. Years of conditioning whispered in my ear, "Don't take too much, you don't deserve it, you're different." And still, despite the ache, I carried gratitude like a badge. Whenever friends complained about strict parents, I defended mine. "My mum worked so hard for us," I'd say. "She only wanted the best." I recited that line until I believed it, or at least until I convinced others, because to admit otherwise felt disloyal, like tearing down the very woman who had clothed me, housed me, and, by all appearances, sacrificed everything. Even after marriage, when Ethan gently pointed out the unequal servings at family dinners, I brushed it aside. "That's just her way," I'd reply, the same phrase I'd clung to since childhood. To challenge it meant unravelling a lifetime of excuses, and I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to see the truth. That what I called care had always been control, and what I thought was love had always been a quieter form of rejection. And so, well into adulthood, I still thanked my mother for the very differences that wounded me. I still believed I owed her gratitude for making me special. I carried the debt like inheritance, blind to the cracks beneath the pedestal. Because good daughters don't question the story, they repeat it. It was the kind of gesture that, on the surface, looked generous. My mother arrived at our house one Sunday afternoon, carrying a porcelain plate covered with a linen napkin. "A treat for my hard-working daughter," she announced, her voice honeyed as she set it down in front of me. The boys ran past, chasing each other with toy cars, while Ethan glanced up from the newspaper with a polite smile. Helen loved making entrances, loved the attention that came with a grand reveal. She whisked away the napkin, and there they were. Belgian truffles, round and dusted, sitting primly in little paper cups. The chocolate looked slightly matte, not glossy, but I told myself not to overthink it. My mother leaned closer. "Go on, Mara, have one while they're fresh." Her tone made it sound like an invitation, but her eyes made it a command. I reached for one, the corner dented as though it had been mishandled. The shell cracked under my teeth with an unexpected crunch. Chocolate wasn't supposed to crunch. The taste that followed was bitter, grainy, with a stale dryness that clung to my tongue. "Different, isn't it?" Helen said, smiling that tight-lipped smile I knew too well. "Yours is special." Within an hour, cramps coiled through my stomach like knives. I excused myself, clutching the banister as I climbed the stairs, then collapsed onto the bathroom floor. Cold tile pressed against my cheek as waves of nausea left me trembling and sweaty. I tried to steady my breathing, but the dizziness blurred the edges of the room. Downstairs I could hear my mother's laughter mingling with Ethan's steady murmur. No one came up. No one checked. When Ethan finally did knock on the door, his expression was more confused than alarmed. You okay? Food poisoning, maybe? Something I ate, I whispered, my lips dry. I couldn't bring myself to say it. Not yet. The next morning, I felt fragile but steady enough to clean up. While emptying the trash in the kitchen, something caught my eye. A crumpled candy wrapper buried beneath tissues. White foil, faded lettering. I pulled it out with the tip of a spoon, flattening it on the counter. My breath caught in my throat. The Best Buy date stared back at me. December 2012. It was 2022, 10 years past expiration. The room tilted around me. My mind spun through possibilities, accident, oversight, neglect. But the words replayed in my head. Yours is special. She hadn't handed truffles to anyone else. Only me. Only my plate was different. I slid the wrapper into my pocket, fingers shaking. My first instinct was to throw it away, but something inside me refused. Proof. My whole life had been filled with moments I couldn't prove. Small humiliations brushed off as quirks, silent exclusions no one else noticed. This was tangible, physical, undeniable. That night, after the boys were asleep, I showed Ethan. He squinted at the wrapper, brow furrowed. She probably didn't realise, he said at last. It's not like she checks dates on everything. Ethan, I said slowly, my voice tight, this was 10 years old. It crunched. He winced but shrugged. She's been cleaning out her pantry. Maybe it slipped in by mistake. She told me it was special, just for me. His eyes softened with that mix of affection and weariness I knew too well. Mara, don't turn this into something it's not. She means well. She always means well. And there it was, the familiar dismissal, cloaked as reason, a refusal to see what was right in front of him, his loyalty to peace over truth. My chest tightened, not just with anger, but with a hollow, aching loneliness. Because if my own husband couldn't stand beside me, then I was truly alone at that table. I swallowed the retort rising in my throat and forced myself to nod. Maybe you're right. But inside I felt something splinter. A good daughter could forgive, a good wife could endure. But what about a woman who had spent her whole life eating special portions, swallowing bitterness disguised as love? For the first time, I wasn't sure how much longer I could pretend. The next weekend, we drove over to Helen's house for Sunday lunch. The kind of ritual that had become tradition, even though I dreaded it. She had laid the dining table with her usual precision, polished silverware, linen napkins folded like swans, and in the centre a crystal dish heaped with more of the Belgian truffles. This time, however, the chocolates gleamed the way they were supposed to, shiny, smooth, almost decadent. Imported, she said proudly as Noah reached for one. He popped it into his mouth, chewed and smiled. Perfect, Mom, better than the ones I had last week at the office. I froze. Better than the ones at the office, so Noah had tried them before. Ethan picked up another bit into it and nodded appreciatively. Fresh, he agreed. Really good. I sat there, pulse thundering in my ears, because these truffles looked nothing like the ones she had handed me. No dents, no grainy texture, no bitter aftertaste. And when I checked the wrapper tucked neatly on the side, the date read, Best by May 2023, perfectly within range. My stomach lurched as realization crashed over me. Only mine had been different. Only mine had been old. I glanced at Helen. She was watching me, her face composed, lips curved, in that familiar half-smile. She didn't offer me one this time. She didn't have to. The message was already delivered. I pushed back my chair under the pretense of helping in the kitchen. My hands trembled as I opened the trash can beneath the sink. More wrappers, more modern dates, all current. The truth sat there in plain foil, fresh chocolates for everyone else, expired relics for me. By the time I returned to the table, my chest felt tight, my vision sharp, with something close to fury. Noah was laughing at a joke Helen told, Ethan listening politely. They were relaxed, comfortable, safe. I, on the other hand, was vibrating with the knowledge that what happened to me last week hadn't been an accident. It had been a choice. The lunch dragged on, a blur of conversation I couldn't follow. My fork scraped across my plate, pushing food back and forth without appetite. At one point, Helen reached over, gently adjusting my napkin as though to tuck me into my place. Her hand lingered on my shoulder. "You're quiet today," she observed softly, almost tender. "I'm tired," I replied, keeping my eyes down. Her grip tightened for just a second, almost imperceptibly, before she let go. The corners of her lips lifted. "That's all right. You've always been a little delicate." The word stung more than it should have. Later, when Ethan carried the boys to the car and Noah lingered to pack leftovers, I stood by the doorway, clutching my coat. Helen brushed past me to close the cabinet, her perfume heavy in the air. She leaned close enough that her words brushed my ear. "Your portion is always different, Mara. You know that." It was said lightly, almost conspiratorial, as though she were letting me in on a family joke. But the meaning was razor sharp. I stepped back, searching her face for some hint of remorse, some suggestion it was all a misunderstanding. But her eyes were cool, steady, and utterly sure of themselves. She wasn't careless, she wasn't oblivious. She had done it on purpose, and she wanted me to know. By the time we drove home, Ethan was humming softly to the radio, the boys chattering in the back seat. I stared out the window, replaying every detail, every wrapper, every smirk. And in that long stretch of highway, I felt the bottom drop out of me. All those years convincing myself my mother meant well, all those excuses I made for her. Gone in an instant, replaced by a truth I could no longer deny. I wasn't being protected. I was being singled out, targeted, punished. And the worst part wasn't the stale chocolate or the sickness. It was the certainty that no one else noticed, no one else cared. Not my husband, not my brother, not even my children, too young to understand. I was alone in carrying this truth. For the first time, I wondered if being the good daughter had always meant being the disposable one. When Helen called the following week, her tone was light, cheerful, almost childlike in its enthusiasm. "I've rented a cabin on Kamano Island for the weekend," she said. "It will be perfect for us. Fresh air, the ocean, family time. We all need a break." On the surface, it sounded harmless, even generous. Ethan's eyes lit up at the idea of a getaway, and the boys squealed when they heard the word island. My brother Noah agreed immediately, promising to bring board games and marshmallows for roasting. And me? I forced a smile, the kind that hides more than it reveals, because I had no illusions left. The chocolate incident had stripped away the last of my excuses. I no longer believed in mistakes, not after the stale crunch between my teeth. Not after Helen's whispered reminder that my portion was always different. And if this weekend was supposed to be special, then I knew enough to prepare. 3 days before we left, a small package arrived at my doorstep. Inside were 5 button-sized cameras, a portable router, and a note in Noah's handwriting. Don't wait for another chocolate. Record everything. I held the box in my lap for a long time, tracing the shape of the devices. It was my brother's way of protecting me, of finally acknowledging what I had endured for years. But it also underscored how isolated I had become. To prove what my own mother was doing, I would need evidence, angles, footage. Truth wasn't enough unless it could be played back on a screen. The ferry ride to Kamano was grey and windy. The boys pressed against the railings as seagulls swooped overhead. Helen greeted us on the porch of the rented cabin, dressed in a quilted vest, her hair tucked neatly behind pearl earrings. She looked every bit the picture of wholesome elegance, her arms outstretched as she pulled the boys into hugs. Ethan kissed her cheek. Noah carried in the groceries she had brought, and for a moment anyone passing by would have thought we were the happiest of families. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and salt. It was small, just 2 bedrooms and a loft, with a kitchen that opened onto a wooden dining table, long enough for 6. The windows framed the forest outside, mist rising between the pines. It should have felt like a retreat. Instead, every corner seemed charged, humming with attention only I could hear. I unpacked slowly, slipping the pouch of cameras into my sweater pocket. That night, when the house grew quiet and breaths deepened into sleep, I moved through the shadows. Camera 1 in the kitchen cabinet, facing the prep counter. Camera 2 above the refrigerator, angled toward the sink. Camera 3 in the hallway, disguised as a coat hook. Camera 4 in a vase on the dining table. Camera 5 in our room, just in case. Each synced to the cloud. Each a silent witness. By 2 a.m., the house was still again, and I lay awake, my heart pounding with equal parts dread and relief. Morning brought pancakes and laughter. Helen hummed as she stirred batter. The boys darted around the cabin with sticky fingers, and Ethan leaned back in his chair, finally relaxed. Even Noah, sipping coffee on the porch, looked content. It was the kind of scene people post online, framed with hashtags about family time and simple joys. But underneath, I felt the ground shifting. When Helen placed plates in front of us, mine arrived last as always. Smaller, plainer. A ritual so old it might have seemed invisible to anyone else. Ethan chuckled softly, kissing my temple. "Mum's spoiling us," he murmured. I forced a smile, my fork heavy in my hand. Because I knew better, every bite tasted like performance, every smile from Helen like choreography. She was the star of her own play, and we were just props. And if she had written a part for me, it was one I no longer wanted to play. I caught her watching me across the table, her expression unreadable. And in that silent exchange, I understood one thing with terrifying clarity. This weekend wasn't about relaxation, it was about setting the stage. And the real performance hadn't even begun. The afternoon passed in a blur of settling in. Helen insisted on assigning rooms, moving through the cabin with the authority of someone who owned it. "Noah, you'll stay in the master with the boys and Ethan," she declared, already dropping duffel bags onto the thick, quilted bedspread. "Plenty of room, and it'll be warmer for the children." Ethan nodded without hesitation, oblivious to the implication. The boys squealed at the thought of sleeping in the same room as their father and uncle, climbing over the bed like puppies. "And me?" I asked carefully. Helen smiled, tilting her head. "Oh, sweetheart, I thought you'd be more comfortable in the loft. There's a bunk bed just off the kitchen. It'll give you a little peace and quiet." I stepped into the narrow space she indicated. The ceiling sloped low, the mattress thin and child-sized, the draught from the kitchen window sharp against my skin. Peace and quiet, she'd called it. Exile was closer to the truth. I swallowed hard, masking the sting with a polite nod. Of course. Dinner that evening was laid out like a magazine spread. Roast chicken, golden brown, bowls of salad, warm bread that filled the cabin with yeasty comfort. Helen moved gracefully, serving plates one by one. Noah received generous helpings, Ethan too. The boys' plates overflowed with potatoes and drumsticks. Mine arrived last. Kale, steamed carrots, a slice of chicken stripped of its skin. "There you are," Helen said warmly, placing it before me. "Just the way you like it." The way I like it. The lie burned in my chest, but I smiled and thanked her, the way I'd done all my life. Across the table, Ethan was already cutting meat for Miles, too distracted to notice. Noah passed bread, chuckling at something Helen said. I chewed the bitter greens, each bite tasting less like food and more like compliance. Later, when everyone retreated to their corners, Noah reading by the fire, Ethan tucking the boys in, I slipped back into the kitchen. The house was dim, shadows stretching long across the wooden floor. I opened my bag and pulled out the pouch of cameras. My hands moved quickly, almost automatically. One above the stove, another near the pantry, a third angled toward the sink. Each tiny lens blinked to life, silently recording. As I adjusted the final one inside a cupboard, I heard the floor creak. My heart lurched as I turned, half expecting to be caught. But it was Helen, standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the hallway light. She carried a porcelain teapot, steam curling from its spout. "Still awake?" he asked, voice soft, almost motherly. I couldn't sleep, I admitted, forcing steadiness. She poured tea into a delicate cup, setting it on the table before me. "Chamomile, good for your nerves." Her eyes glinted in the dim light, sharp beneath the softness. She watched as I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, though I didn't drink. Then she leaned closer, her perfume a cloud of roses and powder. "Tomorrow," she said, her smile widening, "I've prepared something special just for you." The words slipped out casually, almost like a promise, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. My throat tightened. "What kind of special?" I managed. She tilted her head, amusement flickering across her features. "You'll see." And then she patted my shoulder gently, as if she'd just offered comfort, and walked away down the hall. I sat there long after she disappeared, the cup cooling in my hands. My pulse thundered, my skin prickled with cold despite the warmth of the tea. I knew that tone, that smile. It was the same one that had accompanied stale chocolates and hollow explanations. Only this time it carried the unmistakable promise of escalation. Tomorrow the performance would begin. The following evening carried with it a strange kind of ceremony, as though Helen had been rehearsing for days. By late afternoon, she shooed all of us out of the kitchen, insisting she needed space to arrange everything perfectly. Noah retreated to the porch with his phone. Ethan took the boys down to the beach, and I lingered in the living room, every nerve sharpened, waiting. When Helen finally called us in, the dining table had been transformed. Each place was set with a glossy lacquered bento box, tied neatly with golden string, a handwritten tag on top in elegant cursive. Noah's name glistened in black ink, Ethan's in neat slanted letters, the boys' tags decorated with tiny hearts. And then there was mine, Mara, bold, centred, written with a flourish that made my stomach knot. Helen stood at the head of the table, hands folded like a hostess at a fine restaurant. "I thought we'd try something different tonight," she said brightly. "Imported, exclusive. I wanted each of you to feel special." The word landed like a stone in my chest. Special, always that word. The boys gasped with delight, tugging at the strings on their boxes. Noah laughed as he lifted the lid of his to reveal neat rows of glossy sushi, pickled vegetables, tiny desserts. Ethan's was filled with grilled meats and vibrant greens. Their exclamations of pleasure filled the room like applause. Helen beamed, basking in their praise. Then she turned to me, her eyes fixed, her smile sharpened. "And this one," she said, her voice dropping just a note, "is yours, Mara." She carried it herself, setting it directly in front of me, her fingers lingering on the lid, custom made. The weight of the box pressed against me like a dare. My palms prickled with sweat. I could feel the others watching, waiting for me to untie the string and reveal whatever waited inside. But something inside me refused to play along. "Thank you," I said softly, pushing the box an inch away. "I'll save it for later." A flicker crossed her face, something sharp, almost predatory, before the smile snapped back into place. "Oh, but you must try it now. It's freshest this way." I shook my head. "I'm not hungry." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Ethan glanced between us, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Noah cleared his throat. The boys looked up in confusion. Helen's smile widened, but her eyes were cold as glass. "You're being ungrateful," she murmured, just loud enough for the table to hear. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but forced my voice steady. "I'm being careful." The words hung in the air, brittle and sharp. For a moment, no one moved. The crackle of the fireplace filled the void, a log collapsing into sparks. Ethan broke first, chuckling nervously. "Mum, maybe she's just tired. The kids wore us out today." He reached across the table, nudging the box closer to me as if to smooth things over. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I said, "I'll save it for later." The tension was thick enough to choke on. Noah shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. The boys returned to their food, subdued by the strange energy swirling between the adults. Helen leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly against her teacup. The smile never left her lips, but the performance had faltered. She wasn't used to defiance, not from me. I met her gaze across the table, refusing to look away. In that silent exchange, everything unsaid burned between us. The stale truffles, the smaller portions, the years of being special. She wanted me to open the box, to comply, to prove I was still the obedient daughter willing to swallow whatever she served. But, for the first time, I didn't. The meal dragged on, every clink of silverware echoing too loud. Conversation stuttered, then died. Finally, Helen gathered the empty plates with deliberate grace, her movements controlled but tight at the edges. As she lifted my untouched box, her lips brushed close to my ear. "Tomorrow you'll see," she whispered, and with that she carried it back into the kitchen, the golden string glinting under the light like a fuse waiting to be lit. When dessert time came, Helen reappeared from the kitchen with an almost theatrical flourish. "I have something extra for the boys," she announced, carrying 2 smaller bento boxes decorated with ribbons. She placed one in front of Theo, the other in front of Miles. My heart clenched when I saw the tag on Miles's box. The lettering was neat, but next to his name, Helen had written in parentheses, "Nut-free safe." It looked deliberate, almost performative, as if she were broadcasting her attentiveness. But what made my stomach twist wasn't the tag, it was the ribbon. Every other box had been tied with a shiny golden cord. Miles's box was tied with something different, a duller string, thinner, almost frayed. At first glance, no one else noticed, but the moment I saw it, a chill ran through me. I reached for my glass of water, trying to disguise the tremor in my hand. My mind flashed back to the truffles. How only mine had been expired. How everyone else's had been fresh. She liked to mark things. She liked to signal difference. And now she had done it again. Miles reached eagerly for the box, his small fingers tugging at the knot. My breath caught. Without thinking, I leaned over. "Here, sweetheart," I said gently, sliding the box toward myself. "Why don't you try Theo's instead? You two can switch tonight, just for fun." The boys laughed at the idea of swapping, oblivious to the edge in my voice. Theo tore open the ribbon without hesitation, delighted at the little cakes inside. Miles didn't protest, happily eating from his brother's portion. Across the table, Helen's eyes flicked toward me. The smile on her lips never faltered, but her gaze sharpened, cutting like a blade. She knew exactly what I'd done, and I knew she wanted me to know. My chest tightened, every muscle taut with dread, because it wasn't just me anymore. Whatever game she was playing had reached for my children. The thought made me cold all over. I forced myself to sit through the rest of the meal, each bite mechanical, each word of conversation floating past unheard. Ethan chatted with Noah about fishing trips, the boys giggled over their desserts, and Helen carried on like the perfect hostess. But I could feel her attention pressing against me, testing the boundaries, daring me to flinch. When the plates were finally cleared, I excused myself under the pretense of checking on the boys. In reality, I slipped into the kitchen, pulling out my laptop from its hiding place. With trembling hands, I scrolled through the live feeds from the cameras I had set up. Grainy footage flickered across the screen. The stove, the counters, the cupboards. At 3:14 p.m, I found what I was looking for. Helen, alone in the kitchen, gloves on, carefully opening a small container from her purse. She studied its contents, then leaned over one of the smaller bento boxes, the one later labelled nut-free safe. Her shoulders shifted as though she were sprinkling something inside. A quick shake, a pat of her hand, smoothing the surface, then the ribbon tied with deliberate precision. I stopped the footage before my stomach turned any further. I didn't know exactly what she had added, but the intention was unmistakable. For years I had told myself it was only me, that I could endure the smaller portions, the stale chocolates, the quiet humiliations. But this crossed into something else entirely. She was willing to risk my son's safety, maybe even his life. The realization knocked the air out of me. Fear, hot and raw, surged through my veins, and with it came resolve. I closed the laptop, slipping it back into its hiding place. My fingers were steady now. my pulse calmer than it had been all evening. There was no room left for doubt or excuses. If my mother wanted a performance, I would give her one. But this time, I would control the stage. As I walked back into the dining room, Helen was pouring herself tea, humming softly, her expression serene. She looked up as I entered, her smile widening as though nothing had happened. "Did the boys enjoy their treats?" she asked lightly. I met her gaze head on, my own smile thin. "They're fine," I said simply. Her eyes glimmered with something dark, an unspoken challenge. Then she leaned forward, placing the porcelain teacup down with a delicate clink. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice low and velvety, "we'll have something truly unforgettable. Just wait, Mara. I've prepared something very special for you." The words settled like ice in my bones. Dinner on the final night began with the same careful choreography as before. Helen moved with elegance, carrying each box to the table as though she were unveiling art pieces in a gallery. Golden ribbons gleamed, names written in her practiced hand. Noah and Ethan complimented the presentation. The boys clapped their small hands, and even Charles, quiet until then, nodded approvingly. When she set the final box in front of me, her smile lingered. "This one is yours, Mara. Custom, of course." I stared at the box, the string tied tight, the cursive letters spelling out my name. My stomach churned. I could almost hear the faint buzz of the hidden cameras overhead, recording every twitch of her fingers. Ethan nudged me gently. "Go ahead." She worked hard on this. The room waited, expectant. Helen's eyes glinted, waiting for me to obey. Instead, I pushed back my chair. My voice came steady, though my heart hammered against my ribs. "Before we eat," I said, "there's something everyone should see." Confusion rippled across the table. Noah frowned. "See what?" I stood, walked to the cabinet, and retrieved my laptop. The weight of it felt like armour in my hands. Returning to the table, I set it down beside Helen's delicate teacup. My fingers didn't tremble as I pulled up the footage. The screen flickered to life, grainy, black and white. There was the kitchen, empty at first. Then the door creaked open and Helen appeared, her silhouette sharp in the frame. She slipped on latex gloves with practiced ease, reached into her purse, and lifted out a small black container. Noah leaned forward, his face paling. Helen opened the container, reached in with silver tweezers, and extracted something dark and writhing, a cockroach, its legs kicking. With deliberate care, she nestled it into the bed of rice inside a bento box, the one later tied with my name. She sprinkled sesame seeds over the top, smoothing the surface like frosting on a cake. Gasps erupted around the table. Theo covered his eyes. Miles whimpered. Ethan muttered, "Oh my God," under his breath. I froze the frame, the insect half buried in rice, Helen's gloved hand still hovering above it. "This," I said evenly, "was the box she made for me." Silence pressed heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Helen's face remained composed, though a faint flush crept up her neck. Then she laughed lightly, brittle as glass. "That's absurd. Anyone could fake a video like that. You must have edited it." I clicked again, switching to the second angle. This time the shot was clearer, taken from above the refrigerator. It showed her profile in crisp detail. The tweezers, the insect, the box labelled Mara. Every gesture undeniable. Noah's chair screeched against the floor as he pushed back. "Mom, no, tell me this isn't real." Helen's lips parted. But no excuses came. The mask slipped, if only for a heartbeat. I saw it then, the flash of fury, the contortion of her face into something raw and unguarded. "She doesn't belong here," Helen hissed suddenly, the words spilling like poison. Her voice was sharp, stripped of sweetness. "She never has." The room froze. Ethan's mouth fell open. The boys shrank against him, and even Charles stiffened. I forced myself to hold her gaze. "Say it again," I whispered. Her hands trembled on the table. "From the moment you were born." "Mara, you were different. Difficult. I gave you everything, and still you weren't enough. You think you fit here, but you don't. You've never been welcome." The words sliced through me, cruel in their nakedness. But they also did something else. They confirmed everything I had suspected, every fear I had buried. This wasn't love warped into care. This was rejection, plain and brutal. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of years lifting and settling all at once. Around us, the silence deepened, the family suspended between disbelief and horror. And for the first time, the good daughter inside me didn't shrink. She didn't excuse. She didn't comply. She stared back, unflinching, at the woman who had raised her, and finally saw the truth without disguise. The air in the cabin was suffocating, charged with a silence that felt ready to snap. Helen's outburst, her admission that I had never belonged, still hung like smoke, acrid and heavy. Noah's face was pale. Ethan's hands trembled on the boy's shoulders. But I wasn't done. "Everyone deserves to see the rest," I said, my voice steady now. I clicked again, pulling up another file from the hidden cameras. The footage shifted to an earlier angle. Helen in the kitchen that afternoon, her purse open on the counter. This time she pulled out not one container, but two. She set them side by side, unlatching each with meticulous care. One was the box labelled Mara. The other bore a neat tag that read "Nut-free safe," the one intended for Miles. My breath caught, even though I'd already seen it. On screen, Helen reached into the first container, sprinkling something dark into my rice. Then she turned to the second box, doing the same motion, shaking, smoothing, tying the ribbon with deliberate precision. The room erupted. "That was for my son," Ethan said hoarsely, his voice breaking. His arms tightened protectively around Miles, who whimpered against his chest. Noah stood abruptly, his chair clattering to the floor. "Mum, what the hell is this? Are you insane?" Helen's face flushed crimson. "It's not what it looks like." But I cut her off, clicking again. "And here's more." The screen lit with another timestamp earlier in the day. Helen on the phone, pacing the kitchen. She held up a receipt, glancing at it before dialing a number scrawled in her notebook. I zoomed in, letting the digits fill the frame. "This is the boutique deli she claimed made the boxes," I explained. But when I called, it rang straight to a Google Voice account, registered under her name. Noah blinked, shaking his head as though trying to clear it. "No, maybe you misread." I hit play. The audio wasn't strong, but faintly you could hear Helen's own voice, rehearsing lines aloud, imported, exclusive, custom-made. Her smile on screen matched the one she'd worn at dinner. It was rehearsed theatre, nothing more. Noah's face twisted, denial warring with shock. "This doesn't mean she meant harm. She's just dramatic. You're making her out to be some villain, Mara. You've always been paranoid about her." The words struck like a slap, the same dismissal I had heard for years. My chest tightened, but I had come prepared for this too. "One more," I said quietly, pulling up the third clip. The camera showed the communal pot of soup simmering on the stove earlier that day. Helen approached, glancing over her shoulder, then pulled a small vial from her pocket. She poured a fine powder into the broth, stirring it with calculated care. Moments later, she rinsed the vial and slipped it back into her apron. The footage froze on her hand mid-motion. That, I said evenly, was a laxative, strong enough to make anyone sick for hours. Ethan's mouth fell open. The boys looked frightened, clinging tighter to him. Noah swayed, his hand gripping the back of a chair. His lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. He sank slowly into his seat, his face collapsing into disbelief. Helen slammed her palm against the table, the sound sharp and violent. "Enough? You're twisting everything? You've always twisted everything, Mara." Her voice rose to a shriek. "You're ungrateful, disloyal. After all I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" But no one was listening anymore. The screen behind her told the story she couldn't rewrite. The evidence was there, undeniable, playing out in multiple angles and timestamps. The boys whimpered, Noah buried his face in his hands, and Ethan whispered, almost to himself, "She could have hurt us all." I closed the laptop gently, the click of the lid final as a gavel. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one on trial. Helen was, and the jury at last was watching the truth unfold. We left Kamano Island under cover of night. The boys were bundled in their pyjamas, asleep before the car reached the ferry dock. Ethan gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles blanched white, his jaw locked against words he couldn't yet form. Noah sat beside him in silence, eyes hollow, shoulders hunched. I sat in the back between the children, my laptop pressed to my chest like a lifeline. Outside, the mist rolled low over the water, swallowing the cabin behind us until it was nothing more than memory. No one spoke on the ferry ride. The hum of the engine filled the air, broken only by the occasional cry of a seagull. I stared at the dark expanse of sea, replaying every moment from the table. The cockroach, the doctored boxes, the powder in the soup. Proof, finally, after years of being told I was paranoid. Proof that would be more than just my word against hers. By the time we reached home, the sky had begun to pale. I tucked the boys into their beds and kissed their damp foreheads, grateful they had slept through most of it. Ethan hovered in the doorway, guilt carved into his face. He wanted to apologize, I could see it, but the words stuck. Instead, he whispered, "We'll fix this, I promise." I didn't reply. Promises had been too easy for too long. What mattered now was action. That morning, I walked into the local police station with the flash drive in hand. The officer on duty was a weary-looking man in his 50s. He slid the drive into his computer, watching the footage in silence. When Helen's gloved hand appeared on screen, placing the cockroach in the rice, his brows furrowed. By the time she was pouring powder into the soup, his jaw had tightened. "This qualifies as criminal endangerment," he said firmly, pulling out a notepad. "You'll want to file for a protective order immediately." The process blurred together. Forms, signatures, the clinical language of law. Respondent, petitioner, evidence exhibits. Words that stripped the horror of its personal sting, rendering it into something the system could process. By the end of the day, I walked out with the beginning of a restraining order. Helen would be legally barred from contacting me, the boys, or Ethan. But of course, paper doesn't stop persistence. The first email came at midnight from an address I didn't recognize. "I'm sorry, Mara. You misunderstood. Let's talk." I deleted it, but more followed, long, rambling messages that swung between syrupy apologies and venomous accusations. Some were written like prayers, others like curses. Then came the letters, delivered in unmarked envelopes. "I only wanted to protect you. You've turned my family against me. You will regret this." Each one I filed away, building another trail of proof. Charles, my father, stayed silent. He hadn't spoken during the confrontation, and afterward he vanished into quiet compliance. Ethan reached out, but Charles answered only in short, clipped sentences. "I don't know what to say. It's complicated." To him, silence was survival. To me, it was betrayal. Noah, on the other hand, unravelled. He called me the second night, his voice breaking. "I didn't believe you. All these years I thought you were exaggerating. And then, seeing it, I can't get it out of my head. I can't believe she would risk the boys." The weight of his guilt poured through the phone, heavy and raw. "I'm sorry, Mara. I should have protected you." I closed my eyes, exhaustion pressing down. "You believed what everyone else believed," I said quietly. "That she meant well, that I was just sensitive." His breath hitched. "Not anymore." In that moment, for the first time, I felt a fragile thread of something I hadn't known in years, validation. But it was tangled in sorrow because the cost of truth had been so high. For a few weeks, the restraining order seemed to hold. I allowed myself to breathe again, even if it was shallow and cautious. The boys returned to school, Ethan buried himself in work, and I tried to stitch routine back into the seams of our days. But Helen wasn't finished. People like her rarely are. The call came from the elementary office on a grey Tuesday afternoon. "Mrs. Caldwell?" the secretary asked, her voice clipped but professional. "Your mother is here. She brought a lunch for Miles." The world tilted. My pulse slammed in my ears. "Do not let her give it to him," I said immediately, sharper than I meant. "Keep her there. I'm on my way." By the time I pulled into the parking lot, 2 officers were already standing near the entrance. Helen flanked between them. She clutched a paper bag, her face a mask of righteous indignation. "It's just food," she insisted as I approached. "A healthy lunch. A mother should be allowed to feed her grandson." The secretary handed me the bag with gloved hands. Inside was a neatly packed container labelled in her elegant script. "Nut-free, safe." The words made my skin crawl. One of the officers shook his head grimly. "Given the restraining order, this is a violation. And with your evidence already on file." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Helen's eyes snapped to me, burning. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? To see me dragged away? You've poisoned them against me, Mara, my own family." I steadied my breath. "You did that yourself." She screamed as they led her to the patrol car, her voice echoing across the parking lot, shrill enough that parents turned to stare. "Ungrateful! I gave you life. You were nothing without me." I stood frozen, the lunch bag trembling in my hand, until the officers assured me she would be booked. "Criminal endangerment," they said. The words were clinical, cold, but they rang like a final verdict. That night, after the boys were asleep, Noah came over. He didn't knock, just walked in, his eyes wet, his face drawn. He sank into the kitchen chair as if his bones were made of sand. "I can't stop seeing it," he said hoarsely. "Her face today, the videos, the way she looked at you." I poured him coffee, though neither of us drank. He rubbed his temples, shaking his head. "I owe you an apology. No, more than one. My whole life, I thought you were overreacting. I thought Mum was strict with you because you were the oldest, because she wanted you perfect. But I see it now. She never treated me the way she treated you. She adored me, and you..." His voice cracked. "You were the one she sacrificed." The admission cut deeper than any denial ever had. My throat tightened, my eyes burning, but I kept my voice steady. "She chose you, Noah. You were her favourite, and I was the one who had to pay for it." Tears slid down his cheeks as he reached across the table. "I should have protected you. I should have spoken up." For the first time, I didn't wave away the guilt. I let it sit, heavy and real. "You were a child," I said quietly, "just like me." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick with grief, with the realization of a truth buried for decades. For Noah, it was a shattering of the pedestal he'd kept her on. For me, it was validation, bitter but necessary. Later, after he left, I stood at the boys' doorway, watching them sleep. Their breaths rose and fell in rhythm, their innocence untouched for now. And I made a vow that the cycle would end here. No more special portions, no more whispered rejections wrapped as love. If my mother's legacy was cruelty disguised as care, mine would be the opposite. My sons would never have to doubt their place at the table. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe that breaking free was possible. The summer air had grown heavy with heat by the time the call came. 3 months had passed since the scene at the school, and life had finally started to regain its rhythm. The boys were out on the lawn, chasing each other with water balloons, their laughter ringing bright against the cicada buzz. I sat on the porch swing, a glass of iced tea in hand, savouring the rare peace. Then my phone buzzed, a blocked number. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but something in my gut told me who it was before I even swiped. "Mara," the voice rasped. My chest tightened. "Helen." "I'm so glad you answered," she said quickly, her tone wobbling between relief and desperation. "I've tried so many times, but you kept blocking me. Please, please, hear me out." I stayed silent, my gaze fixed on the boys as they shrieked and laughed in the yard. "I have nothing left," she went on, words spilling fast. "Your father's gone. Noah doesn't visit. I can't pay the rent, can't even buy groceries. You're my daughter. You know what it's like to sacrifice. Don't let me starve." Her voice cracked into sobs, wet and broken. Once, years ago, that sound would have pulled me in. Once, I would have rushed to ease her suffering, convinced it was my duty to save her. But now, the sobs felt like another script, another performance designed to pull me back under her control. I thought of the truffles, the cockroach, the soup, the ribbon on Miles's box. I thought of the way she leaned close and whispered, "Your portion is always different." And I remembered the sting of her voice at the table. "You've never been welcome." "You want food?" I said at last, my voice flat. "Eat what you used to serve me. Expired candy, plain vegetables. Something special." There was a sharp inhale on the other end, followed by silence. Then a wail, jagged and raw. "How can you be so cruel?" I'm your mother." "You made sure I knew exactly what that meant," I replied. Her sobs turned to rage, sputtering words half-choked, ungrateful, cold, heartless. I let them wash over me, no longer cutting the way they once had, because I understood now every insult, every rejection had never been about me. It had always been about her hunger for control, her need to decide who belonged and who didn't. "I won't let you hurt me or my children ever again," I said firmly. And then, with a calm I didn't recognize in myself, I ended the call. For a long moment I sat in the stillness, phone heavy in my hand, my heart surprisingly steady. The porch swing creaked softly as I leaned back, watching the boys tumble across the grass, their faces lit with pure joy. Ethan stepped outside then, a towel draped over his shoulder, grinning as he watched the chaos unfold. "You okay?" he asked, pausing when he saw my expression. I met his eyes and nodded. "Better than okay." The sunlight slanted across the yard, golden and warm. For the first time in years, the air felt light, untainted by dread. Helen's voice, her grip, her shadow, none of it held power here anymore. I sipped my tea, listening to my son's laughter, and felt something I had almost forgotten, freedom. Not because my mother was gone, but because her hold on me was. And as the porch swing rocked gently beneath me, I knew the cycle was broken. The good daughter had finally learned how to let go. 2 nights after the phone call, I found an envelope resting on the porch swing where I usually sat in the evenings. My name was written across the front in Ethan's familiar, uneven scrawl. At first, I thought it was just a note reminding me about groceries or a silly love letter the boys had coaxed him to write. But when I slid it open, the weight of the words inside nearly stopped my breath. "Mara," it began. I should have said this out loud years ago. I should have shouted it, but instead I stayed silent. And silence, I've learned, is its own kind of betrayal. My fingers tightened around the page as I read on. Ethan confessed that all the times he had brushed aside my fears at the dinner table, in the kitchen, even after the chocolates, he had done it not out of malice, but out of weakness. He admitted he couldn't stand to believe that a mother, his mother-in-law, could be capable of such cruelty. Denial was easier. His peace of mind had been bought with my isolation. "I thought I was keeping the family together by smoothing things over," he wrote. "But what I really did was abandon you when you needed me most. I let you carry the weight alone. For that, I am deeply sorry." Tears pricked my eyes. Ethan wasn't a man of many words, not on paper, not in person. But here, on this page, he laid himself bare. He described watching the footage at the cabin, the way his stomach turned, the shame that lodged in his throat as he realized I had been right all along. "I saw your strength that night, facing her when I couldn't. I saw the years you endured, and I finally understood how much I had failed you." He ended with a vow, "I will never be silent again. I will never let you stand alone. You are my family, Mara, you and our boys. That is all that matters." I folded the letter slowly, pressing it against my chest. The ache that bloomed wasn't just sorrow, it was recognition. For years I had begged for someone to see me, to stand beside me. And here at last was Ethan stepping into the light, however late. That night, after the boys were asleep, I found him in the living room, the lamp casting a warm glow over his tired face. I handed him the letter. "You could have just told me," I said softly. He looked down, shame flickering in his eyes. I didn't know how, not until I wrote it. I sat beside him, leaning against his shoulder. Then keep saying it. Not with words, but with actions. That's how we move forward. He nodded, his hand tightening around mine. For the first time, I believed him. Days later, Noah visited with a basket of groceries. He helped the boys set up a tent in the backyard, their laughter echoing through the twilight. Watching them, I realized something that should have been obvious all along. Family isn't defined by blood or titles. Family is who shows up, who stays, who chooses you even when it's hard. My mother had chosen to reject me, to single me out, to make me feel unwanted. Ethan had chosen silence until now, and Noah, once blind, had chosen to open his eyes. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered the words aloud, almost like a vow to myself. Real family is the one who chooses to stand beside you. The boys ran up then, faces flushed, demanding s'mores. Ethan lit the fire pit, Noah handed out marshmallows, and I sat back, letting the glow wash over me. For a fleeting moment, the ache in my chest loosened. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The scars my mother left would never vanish, not completely. There would always be a part of me that flinched at the word special, that hesitated before trusting too deeply. But there was also freedom in accepting that truth. I didn't need her approval to define me anymore. The good daughter was gone. What remained was a woman who had survived rejection, who had built her own table, her own circle of love. And as the fire crackled and my son's laughter rose into the night, I knew this ending was both sweet and bitter, justice and grief bound together. The kind of ending that leaves you free but never untouched.